Okay, so my friend calls this the crab theory, and honestly, I have no idea why she calls it that. But basically, it's this theory that you can control how other people perceive you. It's kind of simple and complex at the same time, in that it's simple to do, but a little bit complex to understand. But I'm going to give it a shot and try to explain it. So, to understand the crab theory, we have to agree on two main things to move forward. The first is that people's opinions are a reflection of themselves. So, you've probably heard of this before. I think the main reason is that we're all in the center of our own worlds because, we can only live our own life. And on top of that, we have a very limited understanding of what our own world is, primarily because it's entirely shaped by our own experiences. So when you have an opinion or you make a judgment, it's somewhat of a projection of yourself, feelings, your experiences. So even when someone is sharing a story that's completely independent of you, it's likely that you're trying to place yourself in their shoes as they're narrating the story because, everyone likes to be the main character. So that's the first one. People's opinions are a reflection of themselves. Number two is the existence of this thing called a dominance hierarchy, which is essentially like this pyramid where the top are all the elites, and they're typically like the most successful, the wealthiest. Most people will look up to them and want to be like them. And at the bottom are the people that are kind of shunned by society. No one wants to surround themselves with them. Maybe they're very emotionally stunted or depressed or just, lacking ambition and probably not very wealthy. So with the existence of this dominance hierarchy, the idea is that we're all trying to play the game to get to the top, or at least at some point were if we didn't, fall into this bottomless pit of the bottom of the dominance hierarchy. But this whole game happens somewhat subconsciously when we compare ourselves to other people. So comparing is completely natural. It happens all the time, even from the moment where you first meet someone and you're trying to evaluate, like, oh, should I continue talking to them at this like networking event or happy hour or party? Or maybe you're trying to think like, can I be friends with this person? You likely know within the first few minutes whether or not you even like them. And you also know if you're impressed by them or turned off by them. And that is kind of like an indicator of where you see yourselves in relation to that person on this dominance hierarchy. So some people you'll evaluate as better than you and therefore higher than you on this dominance hierarchy. Whereas with other people that you're kind of turned off by, you'll probably think of them as lower than you on this dominance hierarchy, or like some aspect of like, well, I'm kind of better than them, or I'm smarter than them, or whatever. So those are the main two things. Number one, people's opinion are a reflection of themselves. And number two, acknowledging the existence of the dominance hierarchy. All right. So that was a preface. This next part is going to sound like a little bit of a mind fuck. So stay with me. I'm going to use an example from one of my favorite chapters of any book that I read. And it's called Rule Number 1, Stand Up Straight with Your Shoulders Back. It's the first chapter of Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life book. And honestly, I've cropped out this chapter alone and sent it to so many of my friends and reread it myself many, many times. It's really helped me on like a personal level. But anyways, that's all to say that I really recommend it. So in this book, or in this chapter rather, he introduces the idea of the dominance hierarchy in various species. So he talks about birds, chickens, wolves, lobsters, and he describes this hierarchy as the pecking order, which is in its very literal sense, kind of the social norm for how chickens actually eat. The same few chickens are given this privilege to eat first when the chicken coop or whatever gets their food. So it quite literally is this order in which they eat. What's crazy is that all the chickens within this coop have somehow agreed that this order exists. They've communicated that these people or these chickens are at the beginning of this pecking order, and then certain chickens are afterwards or at the very end. But that's not even the most fascinating example. The most fascinating is when he talks about lobsters. And it's super interesting because he also describes how similar their nervous system is to humans. It's a much more simplified version compared to ours, but their brain also relies on very, very similar neurochemicals. That goes back to some similar ancestors. So anyways, lobsters. They are very, very territorial creatures. And they mostly tend to stay to themselves unless they're, scavenging for food or looking for new territory to live in. But anytime they're doing those things, it's very likely that they'll cross onto another lobster's territory. And when they do that, both those lobsters, like the one that's trespassing and the one that has that territory, confront each other. And they become super aggressive. And what they're trying to do here is show dominance. But there's many levels to it, though. Like, it starts off with them spraying pee in each other's faces and, communicating their anger. And next, I think they'll puff up their chests and circle around each other. And eventually, it could escalate to a physical fight. But when lobsters get to the point where they're actually beefing it, there's always a clear winner or loser. Like, the losing lobster will either have to, claim mercy, quit the fight, or get injured and then quit the fight, or in its worst case, death. But what's most interesting is what happens immediately after the fight. So for the losing lobster, its brain does a chemical equivalent of dissolving itself and remaking a new brain. And the main difference between its old brain and its new brain is that it's significantly lacking in this one neurochemical called serotonin. And now humans have this too. Serotonin is known to regulate your mood and behavior. And this new brain of this lobster, now lacking in serotonin, makes this losing lobster more likely to continue losing in future conflicts. And should this losing lobster continue to lose more fights or conflicts or whatever, its brain is going to keep repeating that process until eventually it completely stops producing serotonin altogether. Now, what does that even look like? My guess is that it's a very depressed, socially isolated lobster that stays to itself even more and is more likely to run away upon first sight of another lobster. On the other hand, this winning lobster, its brain is now flooded with serotonin, which actually makes him more likely to continue being aggressive and therefore win more physical fights. And relating this back to the whole dominance hierarchy, these winning lobsters kind of represent the top of their dominance hierarchy. So they'll be the ones that are considered the human equivalent of successful and wealthy. They'd be the most confident of the lobster bunch. They'd get all the lobster women, probably reproduce the most, have a lot of children, and they also get to choose whatever territory they want. And the losing lobster is now lower on the dominance hierarchy as it was before it lost. And should it continue losing, it'll just get lower and lower. It's like this bottomless pit of depression, lacking ambition, and they can get deeper and deeper into this void until nobody wants to associate with them. Now, obviously, there are many, many differences between humans and lobsters. But what's interesting is that it all tracks back to the moment they decide to puff up their chests. It's all a dominance game. And I think the equivalent moment for us happens the moment we walk into any room. And that's because it's not only the way other people perceive you, it's about your subtle behaviors that actually shape the way that other people perceive you, despite it being a projection of themselves. Okay, so as an example, let's say you were invited to a house party and you don't really know anyone that's there, but when you arrive, it's bumping. You can hear the music, you can hear tons of people talking. The moment you open that front door and walk in and other people notice you, that is the moment you open that door and walk in, that is that same moment that you are being evaluated for your position on the dominance hierarchy, because it's relative to everybody else that's at that party noticing you. So if you walk in looking like you don't belong there, or you look nervous, or you're slouching or looking around, you look like you don't know anyone there, you won't be treated as if you are meant to take up space at that party. Now, on the other hand, if you walk in all confident, the smile on your face, shoulders back, puffing up your chest a bit, and taking up space, other people will treat you as if you are meant to take up space at that party. That's all to say, the most subtle actions can subconsciously affect your position on the dominance hierarchy. It's never objective. It's all entirely relative to how people perceive themselves, which is also not objective. So flipping the example a little bit, if you were a person who's already at this party and you saw someone walk in, depending on their demeanor, how they're standing, how they're looking around, you would know if you even want to approach them, if you even want to talk to them. And you know this all subconsciously within the first few seconds of observing them. And in the case that they've walked in all confidently, you maybe have processed in your brain that, wow, they are a confident person, or they seem better than yourself in some capacity. If they've given you the sense that they're very confident or successful or whatever, despite the reality of it, you are more likely to treat them as such because of the way that they're acting. And on the opposite side, if someone walks in looking like they don't belong, even if it's a most subtle action, you are more likely to process that subconsciously and treat them as if they actually don't belong. You're more likely to pay less attention to them. And even if you were to talk to them, the tone of your conversations might be more sympathetic, might be coming from a place of, this person is lower than me on the dominance hierarchy. And remember, most of this process does not happen consciously. Okay, so to connect the dots a little bit, when you meet someone, whether you like them or not, your opinion of them or your judgment of them is a reflection of your experiences and your feelings in that moment in time. It's a projection. But that projection is related to the dominance hierarchy because it is related to your view of yourself and where you stand relative to that person. And depending on that judgment, you are likely to treat them as if this projection is true. So if you've subconsciously evaluated that this person is higher than you on the dominance hierarchy, you are likely to treat them as if it is true, despite them being less wealthier than you, less smarter than you, less attractive than you. If they have subconsciously given you those signals that you then have projected and evaluated them to be a signal of being higher on the dominance hierarchy relative to you, you are likely to treat them as if they are, in fact, higher on the dominance hierarchy than you, which probably means you're likely to be more kind to them, do them more favors, and be more agreeable with them. And on the other hand, meeting someone that you evaluate that is lower than you on the dominance hierarchy, you will treat them as such, which might be talking to them in a more sympathetic way, or avoiding them, or ignoring them, or whatever that behavior is that indicates that you yourself were higher. So in conclusion, something as simple as standing up straight with your shoulders back and giving the illusion of confidence and attractiveness can make other people judge you as higher up on the dominance hierarchy relative to them, which is overall a good thing. And then most importantly, treat you as if you are higher up on the dominance hierarchy relative to them, which is also a good thing, which then it's like a self-fulfilling cycle because them treating you like that impacts your serotonin level and it makes it more likely for you to continue walking into more rooms with the same level of confidence that you were faking before until you eventually start to climb upwards. So yeah, that was the crab theory.